Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Native American cultural presentation. Today, we will be discussing a few things like lesson ideas and projects for teaching students about Native Americans, and then how we could incorporate it into our curriculum. We have Karina, who will be discussing relevant historical information. Edith is going to be discussing current demographic data. Jennifer is discussing immigration patterns. Shelby will be sharing cultural traditions, and Abby will be talking about U.S. concerns or problems. Lastly, I, Cassandra, will be discussing how each of these items and their projects and lessons will be incorporated into the curriculum, and then showing at the end of the presentation the state standards these lessons will satisfy. First, we're going to watch a short video on who Native Americans are.
Native Americans, also known as American Indians, Indigenous Americans, and other terms, are the indigenous people of the United States except Hawaii. The name Indian was given by Christopher Columbus, who mistakenly believed he had landed in the Indies. The history of Native Americans in the U.S. began in ancient times, tens of thousands of years ago. Late in the Ice Age, humans journeyed across the Bering Land Bridge that joined Siberia to Alaska. They had gradually migrated across the land and southward into Mexico and beyond. Their descendants explored along the west coast of North America. As early as 1000 BC, they had covered nearly the entire continent. Over thousands of years, as they migrated across the continents, American Indians have developed a variety of languages and civilizations. They came from different tribes, such as in Europe, Asia, or Africa. When the Ice Age ended, the Native Americans developed their tribes by making wise use of natural resources available. They had first experience with growing different crops such as corn and squash, raising animals like turkeys, llamas, and guinea pigs for food, hunting deer, bison, sea mammals, and catching fish by using a variety of efficient methods. Another development during the period before the European invasions was the mound building. From the present-day region of the Midwestern United States to southern Peru and South America, centers of government were marked by enormous mounds of earth. Most of these mounds were flat on top, with palaces and temples built on them. Some were burial sites of honored leaders. American Indian cities were as big as the cities in Europe and Asia at that time. Their fine architecture is still greatly admired. After 1492, European exploration and colonization of the Americas revolutionized how the Old and New Worlds perceived themselves. Many of the first major contacts were in Florida and the Gulf Coast by Spanish explorers. From the 16th through the 19th centuries, the population of Indians sharply declined. Most mainstream scholars believe that, among the various contributing factors, epidemic disease was the overwhelming cause of the population decline of the Native Americans, because of their lack of immunity to new diseases brought from Europe, such as measles, chickenpox, cholera, yellow fever, and many more devastating diseases. However, these diseases were rarely fatal among Europeans. With the meeting of two worlds, animals, insects, and plants were carried from one to the other, both deliberately and by chance, in what is called the Columbian Exchange, especially horse, which escaped and began to breed and increase their numbers in the wild. Native America used horses to carry goods, to hunt game, and to conduct wars and horse raids. The Europeans started colonizing the Americas in order to cultivate new farmlands and create new jobs for the growing populations of Europe. To do so, they often fought Native American tribal nations for the land. During the American Revolution, the newly proclaimed United States competed with the British for the allegiance of Native American nations east of the Mississippi River. Most Native Americans who joined the struggle sided with the British, based both on their trading relationships and hopes that the colonial defeat would result in a halt to further colonial expansion onto Native American land. The United States was eager to expand, develop farming and settlements in new areas, and satisfy land hunger of settlers from New England and new immigrants. The national government initially sought to purchase Native American land by treaties. The states and settlers were frequently at odds with this policy. United States policy toward Native Americans continued to evolve after the American Revolution. George Washington and Henry Knox believed that Native Americans were equals, but their society was inferior. Washington formulated a policy to encourage the civilizing process. This led to the Civilization Fund Act of 1819. As American expansion continued, Native Americans resisted settlers' encroachment in several regions. In the 1830s, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act of 1830, a policy of relocating Indians from their homelands to Indian territory and reservations in surrounding areas to open their lands for non-native settlements. This resulted in the Trail of Tears. Native American nations on the plains in the West continued armed conflicts with the U.S. throughout the 19th century through what were called generally Indian Wars. Notable conflicts in this period include the Dakota War, Great Sioux War, Snake War, Colorado War, and Texas Indian Wars. And one of the last events during the Indian Wars was the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890. Here, warriors, women, and children alike were ferociously slaughtered by the U.S. cavalry. In 1919, the United States, under President Woodrow Wilson, granted citizenship to all Native Americans who had served in World War I. Nearly 10,000 men had enlisted and served, a high number in relation to their population. Despite this, in many areas, Native Americans faced local resistance when they tried to vote and were discriminated against with barriers to voter registration. On June 2, 1924, U.S. President Calvin Coolidge signed the Indian Citizenship Act, which made all Native Americans born in the United States and its territories American citizens. Prior to passage of the act, nearly two-thirds of Native Americans were already U.S. citizens, through marriage, military service, or accepting land allotments. The act extended citizenship to all non-citizen Indians born within the territorial limits of the United States. Under the U.S. Constitution, American Indians today in the U.S. have all rights to vote in elections and run for political office. Controversies, however, remain over how much the federal government has jurisdiction over tribal affairs, sovereignty, and cultural practices. Thank you for watching. Please check out our other animated history shows, and don't forget to share, like, and subscribe.
Like previously mentioned, I will be talking about relevant historical information. So the first war I would like to mention is the French and Indian War from 1754 to 1763. It was also known as the 7 Years' War, and it was a war between Britain and France. It was a conflict regarding territory in the Ohio River Valley. The British formally declared war in 1756. It ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which is where British received Canada from France, Florida from Spain, and permitted France the West Indian Sugar Islands and gave Louisiana to Spain. Number 2 is the Texas Indian Wars from 1820 to 1875. And this is a series of conflicts between settlers in Texas and Southern Plains Indians. This began when first mostly of the Spain European settlers moved to Spanish Texas. And the most popular nation in this area was the Comanche. And the final result was that the United States won. Next, I would like to talk about the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Andrew Jackson was known to be an advocate for Indian removal. When he was a president, he signed the Indian Removal Act. This gave federal government the power to exchange native land in the east of Mississippi for lands to the west, known as the Indian Colonization Zone. This was located in present-day Oklahoma. The government forced Native Americans to vacate their lands that they lived on for generations. Number 4 is the Trail of Tears from 1831 to 1850. It began in the winter of 1831. The Choctaw was the first nation to be expelled under the threat of invasion by the U.S. Army, and they were expelled with no food, supplies, or help from the government. Many died along the way. In the 1840s, thousands of Native Americans were driven off their lands and moved across the Mississippi into this Indian territory. By 1907, Oklahoma became an official state, and the Indian Territory was considered lost. Present day, it is a National Historic Trail, and many portions are accessible by foot, horse, car, or even bicycle. Next, I would like to mention the Dakota War of 1862, and for this, we will watch a YouTube video.
We're like trees. If we don't know our roots and how we're connected from the very beginning to creation and to God and to the land, if you don't have roots, the tree falls and it dies.
Minnesota Makoche, the land of cloud-tinted waters in the Dakota language, is known today as Minnesota. It has been the homeland of the Dakota people for thousands of years.
Beginning in the 1600s, a steady stream of Europeans, first explorers and traders, eventually settlers, came to the land known today as the state of Minnesota.
Settlers were very much a threat to Dakota way of life. They were encroaching onto their livelihood.
The German settlers in Chicago and in Cincinnati were told, once you cross the Mississippi, nobody lives there.
By 1862, Dakota people faced many hardships, and when the U.S. government broke its promises, some of the Dakota people went to war.
When the U.S. government, who made a pact with us, will not live up to its agreement, we have to then defend ourselves.
The fighting lasted 6 weeks, and many people on both sides were killed.
It impacted everyone in one way or another. It impacted the Civil War in some small way.
Two whole ways of life were clashing, and one was going to lose out.
Descendants of those touched by the war continue to live with the trauma it caused.
You can't just say, oh, I'm going to forget about this. It'll go away. It doesn't go away.
They're never going to give back the land. That's never going to happen. I just want my grandchildren to know what happened and use it to be stronger in their lives.
The Minnesota Historical Society has collected evidence, objects, photos, diaries, letters, and government documents for more than 150 years. This interactive website tells stories about the war, its causes, and its aftermath. The site provides resources for classroom use, as well as links to materials for deeper research. As you examine the evidence presented here, consider what it reveals, not only about the war, but also about how our view of the past is formed by the things we choose to keep and the stories we choose to tell.
In every tragedy, you look for that lesson to be learned. We are a peaceful people and very resilient. We bounce back from anything.
The next war I would like to talk about is the Snake War of 1864. It involved the Indians from the southwestern Idaho region. Military operations were required to place troops in a number of fort camps located in southwestern Idaho, eastern Oregon, northern Nevada, and northeastern California. Number 7 is the Colorado War of 1864 to 1865. The Southern Cheyenne, Aparajo, and allied Brule and Oglala Sioux people versus the U.S. Army, Colorado militia, and white settlers. They fought over the ability of the North American Plain tribes, which was mainly part of the Cheyenne and Aparajo. They fought to maintain control of bison migration grounds on the Great Plains and upper valleys of South Platte. Number 8 is the Great Sioux War of 1876. It is also known as the Black Hills War. It is a series of battles and negotiations. The allies were the Lakota Sioux and the Northern Cheyenne, and they went against the U.S. military. The cause for this war was the desire of the U.S. government to obtain ownership of the Black Hills. Number 9 is the Wounded Knee Massacre of 1890. Around 150 to 300 Lakota Sioux Indians were killed by the U.S. Army. Its location was in the Wounded Knee Creek in southwestern South Dakota. The climax of the U.S. Army's late 19th century efforts to repress the Plains Indians. Number 10 is an important document known as the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. The U.S. Congress passed this act in 1924. It granted the citizenship to all Native Americans born in territorial limits, and its overall impact on rights was very minimal. The next one is the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968. It was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson, and it granted Native Americans the benefits in the Bill of Rights. These benefits are the right to freedom of speech, press, and assembly. but the Native Americans cannot pass or enforce laws that violate certain individual rights. Last, I would like to mention the American Indian Movement, also known as AIM, of 1968. It was founded in Minneapolis, Minnesota by Russell Means, Dennis Banks, and Clyde Belcourt. It was formed in response to police brutality and racial profiling. Lastly, we will watch a YouTube video about the Texas Indian Wars.
In the 1860s, the U.S. Army tried to herd Native Americans onto smaller and smaller parcels of land to make room for white settlers from the east. When negotiations with the Army failed, the Indians fought to keep their land, often in savage battles, like one that occurred 40 miles north of Fort Lyon, Colorado, at a place called Sand Creek.
The Sand Creek Massacre is probably one of the most horrific encounters between Native Americans and the U.S. federal government.
In 1864, about 800 Colorado militiamen attacked an unsuspecting band of Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians who thought they were under federal protection.
And they had signed a negotiation with the federal government where they had agreed to come into the reservation at Fort Lyon.
160 Indians were killed there, mostly women and children. The soldiers scalped or mutilated many of them.
It's difficult to talk about the kind of brutality, but the scalping of people, the maiming of people, Chivington's men actually taking the heads and scalps of women and children and parading them through the streets of Denver a week later when they come back into town.
Word of the killings spread rapidly.
It sent the Great Plains into an eruption of violence. On both sides, that was absolutely horrific. Native Americans retaliated not only against U.S. troops, but against homesteaders who were out on the Great Plains.
The cycle of violence continued for years as Native Americans were forced into smaller and smaller parcels of land. In 1877, a tribe of Indians called the Nez Perce tried to escape to Canada to avoid another massacre. They were led by a chief by the name of Joseph.
Chief Joseph really was somebody who saw the futility of trying to engage with the federal government or trying to combat federal troops who were out on the Great Plains, and really just wanted to remain separate. He wanted his people, the Nez Perce, to be able to stay within a particular area, to be left alone from both settlers and from the federal government.
Chief Joseph led his people on a 1,300-mile trek through the West. When the Army caught up with the Nez Perce, they promised to return them to their ancestral home in Idaho. Instead, they were sent to a dusty reservation in Kansas, where nearly half the tribe died from disease. Despite fierce resistance, the government's Indian removal policy ultimately succeeded. Indians who were once used to freely roaming the land were now confined to tiny reservations, where their descendants remain to this day.
So the activity or assignment we will be doing is a timeline. As you can see here, this timeline has already been completed by myself, and I included the 12 wars and documents in order, and students are going to be able to do the same thing. They can include a one-sentence summary as well if they can. If not, it is okay for them to write down just the name of the war or the document.
So this section could take about a week, if not longer, if needed. In small groups, students will discuss the battles and documents necessary to the Native Americans on different days. In whole group instruction, YouTube videos and textbooks will be used to examine relevant historical information. In addition, students will individually have a documentary to watch as well. On the final day, small groups of 3 to 4 students will create a timeline with the events and documents that stood out most to them. The instructions given and activities done by the students would be incorporated into the curriculum through bridging social studies and ELA. Writing and researching would be done to gather the necessary information to complete the assignments. Lastly, the timeline could be used as an assessment tool to see what the students have retained from lectures, readings, and videos.
Okay, my name is Edith Velasquez, and my topic is on the current demographic data of Native Americans. So looking at the United States as a whole, about 9.7 million people have recognized themselves as American Indian, Alaskan Native, alone or in combination, comprising 2.9% of the total population of 329.5 million. And in 2022, there were 324 federally recognized American Indian reservations. And an Indian reservation is an area of land that is managed by an American Indian tribe under the United States Department of the Interior's Bureau of Indian Affairs. So under that umbrella, there are 574 federally recognized tribes. Not all recognized tribes have a reservation. Some have more than one reservation, some share a reservation, and others have none. Just to name a few of these tribes across the United States, they are the Navajo Nation, the Cherokee Nation, the Choctaw Nation, the Chippewa, the Sioux, Blackfeet, White Mountain Apache, Muskogee Nation, Haudenosaunee Nation, and Blackfeet Nation. And these are just the 10 largest tribes in the U.S. So collectively, the geographical area of all the reservations is about 56.2 million acres, representing 2.3% of the United States. On the next slide. So when we look at the at California more closely and specifically, there are 110 federally recognized tribes. Based on the U.S. Census from last year in 2022, 1.7% of the state population is an American Indian or Alaskan Native. In California, the largest tribe is in Humboldt County, and that is the Yurok tribe, and it consists of about more than 6,000 members. Going back and looking at the California natives, the state, the large size and the varied topography from the mountains to the desert to the coast meant that they lived under different environmental conditions. So this caused to shape and influence their cultures. The rivers, the mountains kept the tribes isolated from one another, so they maintained separate lifestyles along the 60 traditional cultural regions. But even then, they were still able to trade between the tribes, overlap cultural practices, and even intermarry among tribal members. So on the next slide is a short video of those early California Native Americans.
The land we call California has been home to California Indian groups for thousands of years. Today, archaeologists study items such as tools, artwork, toys, and shelters of people who lived long ago. These artifacts provide clues about how California Indians in the area used to live. Archaeologists have learned much about the 4 California Indian groups: the Cahuilla, the Chumash, the Miwok, and the Hupa. While each group had its own styles of clothing, shelter, and unique customs, these groups relied on the natural resources around them to survive. And when they managed to gather more than what they needed, some groups traded with others for the things they needed. Trade is the exchange of goods and services.
They knew how to harvest what was here. And what they didn't have, they traded for. There was a lot of trade going on within California's boundaries. A lot of our roads and are basically trade routes that were used prior to contact.
The Cahuilla lived near what is now called the Mojave Desert in Southern California. They hunted deer and other animals for food, and made their houses out of plants that could be found in the desert. The Chumash lived northwest of the Cahuilla, along the coast, between what is now Los Angeles and Santa Barbara. They thrived on the abundant seafood that the ocean offered. They made boats called tomals, which they used for fishing and traveling up and down the coast. The Chumash used shells for money, which they used to purchase things that they needed from other groups. Farther north, some of the Miwok lived in the mountains, where it got very cold in the winter. To stay warm, they built their houses partly underground. Then, to stay cool, as summer approached, they built houses above ground out of bark. For food, they took advantage of everything their mountainous environment had to offer. They hunted deer in the forests and fished in the lakes and rivers. The Hupa lived in forests even farther north. They hunted the elk and deer that filled the forests and fished. They also gathered acorns, which was an important part of many California Indians' diets. Like the Miwok, the Hupa built their houses partly underground to prepare for the cold winters. The land and its resources influenced more than just food and shelter for most American Indian groups. They also played a part in shaping many customs and traditions. A custom is a way a group of people does something. A tradition is a custom that is passed down from parents to children. For the Hupa, fishing was a tradition passed from parent to child. Using materials found in their environments, Cahuilla and Miwok women, as well as women from other American Indian groups, share a long tradition of basket weaving.
A woman's signature would be in her basket. Her design, she would inherit that design, and that design went into that basket. So if I was another member of the community, I knew exactly who made that basket because it's her design, it's her shape, it's her use of certain materials.
For many American Indian people, basket weaving is an important tradition that is still practiced today. The Miwok made traditional costumes from the feathers of birds found in their environment, much like these, which are still made today. Today, many American Indian groups in California also pass on the beliefs of their ancestors, which can sometimes be expressed through myths and legends. A belief is something that is thought to be true or real. A legend is an old, well-known story. Myths explain how or why things happen or teach lessons. Some American Indian groups also participate in traditional ceremonies as part of their religion, the belief in or worship of one or more gods, and continue to respect the land and resources that their ancestors honored long ago.
The lesson that I would incorporate into a classroom that would be a group project, excuse me, based on the California Native American tribes, to learn about the current demographic data that we have. I would split these students into heterogeneous groups, where they would have to choose a tribe and research on this tribe. The specifics on the research they would have to do would concentrate on where the tribe region, where they lived, what food they ate, their clothing, what type of homes they lived in, how they traded with other tribes, what type of rituals they performed, and any other interesting facts they wish to include. They would have to use the internet along with their social studies books or any other books to find the information. And the outline that is provided that you see here, this is what they would use to write down that information. After they wrote down the information, they would also have to create a visual. A visual would include a diorama, a poster, or a PowerPoint slide, or any other approved creative form of expression. And these are some of the examples that I would show the students just to give them an idea of what a diorama is, if some of them didn't know what it was, and the different type of posters it can do. And a lot of them do know what I hope a PowerPoint slide is. If not, I would show them as well. And they would prepare a presentation, probably a 5 to 10 minute presentation on their chosen tribe.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Vasquez Tapia, and I will be talking about the Native American pattern. But first, let's talk about who were the natives and why they immigrated to the United States. As we all know, there has been a controversy with the Europeans being the first settlers. Sorry. However, it has been proven that in 1492, when Columbus found the Bahamas, the Native Americans were already there. So Columbus ordered to conquer the natives. So as we move along, the natives moved to the United States. I'm so sorry. Native Americans moved to America to have a better life. Therefore, they moved to the United States all around America and the coast. This is why many Native Americans moved to different regions in the United States and to save their families. In fact, the Native Americans created different tribal regions around the United States. One of the purposes was that they implemented. I'm so sorry. Sorry. As days passed, European implemented a policy where they participated different policies and the United States. For this reason, Indonesian people were banished and their homes were burned down. Others died because of different diseases. However, then the Native Americans moved to different regions. On the next slide, we're going to be understanding how colonialism and conquest moved the immigrants.
Immigration. It's been the defining characteristic of America since before our country even began. So it's important to remind ourselves of our rich history, of where we all came from to create this one-of-a-kind melting pot of people that is the United States in the 21st century. This is the first of a 6-part series that attempts to briefly get our arms around that history. The first successful colony in America was established in 1607 in Jamestown, Virginia by English settlers. But these first Europeans arrived in a land that was already home to other people, to indigenous Native Americans who thousands of years before had crossed over a land bridge from Siberia into what's now the state of Alaska. They were the first explorers of this beautiful land, and they would spread throughout the entire continent and throughout Central and Southern America too. Native Americans thrived by harnessing the power of nature, and over time, they formed into many distinct groups, each with their own languages and cultures. Then, in 1492, as legend has it, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue and arrived in the Bahamas, and immediately encountered a group of these indigenous people called the Arawak. The Arawak were curious and friendly, but Columbus was filled with greed, and took some of them prisoner, demanding they show him where the gold they were wearing came from. Now, the Native Americans were so easygoing and poorly armed compared to these Europeans who had modern weaponry like metal-forged swords and armor and even guns, that Columbus said, quote, "I could conquer the whole of them with 50 men and govern them as I pleased." And that's exactly what he and other Spanish conquistadors who came after him did. They vanquished indigenous group after indigenous group with cunning and sheer brutality, and got a lot of help from diseases like smallpox that moved ahead of them and just wiped the natives out.
When smallpox was taken to the New World, nobody in the New World had ever seen a disease like this before, so the number of people who were susceptible was much greater. There was no natural immunity, and so therefore the number of people who could both contract the disease and then spread it, and the number of people to receive it once it had been spread was much higher.
Some scholars think there may have been a population of 20 million Native Americans, and the vast majority, perhaps 95%, were killed by Old World diseases. A continent virtually.
So as the video mentioned, the causes of the Native immigration was the cruelty and the violence treatment by the superior military, diseases, which were smallpox, measles, and syphilis, welfare due to Western culture, natives were going against each other, slavery, involvement in industrial nations, and because natives were being separated and captivated within their communities, that they were sent to reservations. On the next slide, the 10 tribal regions are the Arctic, Leblutsu, California, Great Basin, Southwest, Subarctic, Northwest, Northeast, Great Plains, Southeast. On the Arctic, there was Siberian Wanderers, which was Alaska to Greenland. In the Plateau, there was fishermen and hunters. In California, there was diverse people with different languages. In the Great Basin, there was seasonal resources, and there was a snowy weather. In Southwest, it's a pueblo, and they lived in the masas and deserts. And the subarctic, there was nomadic hunters, which was in like north forest. On the northwest, there was the coast and the forest as tribes hunted and farmed. On the northwest coast, there was woodworkers. On the Great Plains, there was horses and guns. On the southeast, there was skilled farmers, and they lived in villages in the river valleys. If we turn the next slide, there's a map of the tribal regions. In the Arctic, there's a frozen desert, which is from Canada to Greenland. The subarctic is a swampy forest in the land where Alaska and Canada is. Northeast, North Carolina, and the inland to the Mississippi River. Southwest, north of the Gulf of Mexico and the south of Northeast. Plains is between Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains and Southwest desert regions. Great Basin is in the Rocky Mountains and the east. We could, on the next slide. So you ask yourself, how are you going to implement this? And how are you going to teach the children about Native American immigration patterns? So first we have to let children know what is immigration, correct? So I separated immigration in 3 ways. So the first one is immigration is based on, for example, birds are gonna move out of the country, but then they come back in the next season. And the second one's immigration. So that means that it is when people leave their country. And the third one is that immigration is where they go to the country to live. And on the next slide, so it's always important to show the students about how the tribal regions looks and what the Native Americans did to survive. So here is the visual of a virtual tour, and it basically separates the regions based on the tribes, and you get to click on it and see where each tribe lived and how they lived and what cultural values, purposes, beliefs they use. So I'm going to click on the videos to show you. So this type of virtual tour can be also made in a presentation, like a PowerPoint or a slideshow, and it will help you engage with the children and discuss what type of patterns they see of each tribe immigrating to different areas. On the next slide, you could see different hands-on subject objects. For example, the weaving tool, the native statues, the canoe, and the corn. Those are great hands-on objects that could be passed around the class so they could visually see the type of products the natives used. If you click to the next page slide, you will see a project that the students can do, which is a 3D tribal region project. The students can be put in groups of 4. Students will be researching the tribal region by analyzing, observing, identifying, and collecting information of how and where the tribe immigrated to and where their tribe settled in. Students can use books, magazines, and technology. Students will be implementing and observing information by writing and typing the tribal region's information about the native landforms, information patterns, and involvement, such as the tribe's homes. Lastly, students will measure and construct different native regions using landforms, house structures, and other environmental landmarks with craft materials such as pencils, colors, markers, construction paper. On the next slide, this would be an extended activity. I would play 4 corners with them in the classroom. I would have one of the students blindfold themselves, and then I would ask the student, what tribal region in the United States had the Pueblo house? So on each corner, one of the corners would be the Great Plains. The second corner would be Eastern Woodland. The third would be Northwest Coast. And the last one would be Southwest. And I will have the student choose which corner is the correct answer. And that would be the students that would be out.
Okay. Sorry.
No worries. Go ahead.
So these activities from the topics of current demographic data and immigration patterns could be done as a project-based learning, which is an instructional approach designed to give students the ability to develop knowledge and skills through engaging projects set around challenges and problems that they could encounter in the real world. As a group of 4 to 5 students, they can use the information they've been collecting about the land, food, and culture to become the tribe they are assigned to and figure out how they would survive. Then the students would build or create their dioramas, posters, or even use multimedia productions to show what different tribes, shelters, and lives were like. Current demographic data and immigration patterns would be integrated into the social studies and ELA curriculum, and then you could even cross curriculum with math by understanding measurements on maps and distance. Students will learn how to plot and find plots on maps to determine and learn where certain tribes lived and how far apart they were from other tribes, and then identify where these tribes have migrated to.
Hi guys, I am Shelby Phillips and I will be talking about Native American cultural traditions. So I will be focusing on 6 different traditions. The first one is called a powwow, and they originally began as a way for nations to become together to celebrate success in hunting or battle. But eventually, they turned into one of the best ways to connect with ancestors and other tribes. During a powwow, Native Americans gathered together to dance, sing, visit, and make new friends. The next tradition is a fry bread. Fry breads began in 1864 when the Navajos were being forced off their land by the U.S. government. They were given supplies to prevent starvation. During their 300-mile walk from Arizona to New Mexico, They had flour and lard, which led to the creation of fry bread. Fry bread is a large, fluffy, plate-sized piece of dough, as you can see in the picture. The third tradition is a stomp dance. This takes place during crop season and often practiced on stomping grounds around a fire. It is called the stomp dance because the pattern of movement is a stomp and shuffle in a circular motion. When arranged in a circle, dancers move counterclockwise, alternating men and women with children at the end. Next is a wampum. Wampums are beaded belts that are not intended to be worn. They symbolize a work of art and a recording of history. Typically, they are constructed of purple and white clamshells, as you can see in the image. Fifth is grape dumplings, a traditional dessert prepared by rolling out the thin dough, then soaking it in hot Concord grape juice for about 10 to 12 minutes, and then served hot with a side of ice cream. On the next slide, I will be focusing on dream catchers. So beginning in the mid-1800s, the Ojibwe tribe started the trend of dream catchers. Dream catchers are a handmade object that consists of willow hoop with a woven net or web on the inside of the hoop. Native Americans also used sacred feathers and beads to decorate their dream catchers. They were originally created to protect people from bad dreams by having the negative dreams being caught in the web, while the positive dreams would slip through the hole in the center and glide down the feathers. So as you can see, there's two images that are dream catchers made by Native Americans back then, and then two images that are dream catchers today that you guys are most familiar with. On the next slide, we will be watching a video about how dream catchers can be made.
To make your own dream catcher, start with a metal or wooden hoop that is the size you want your dream catcher to be. Apply a line of glue along a short section of the hoop. Then wrap some ribbon or suede lace around the hoop and glue. Continue adding more glue and wrapping the ribbon around the hoop until the whole hoop is covered. Cut off the excess ribbon, then let the glue dry for 15 minutes. Next, tie the end of some string to the hoop. Loop the string around the hoop and down through the opening. Work your way around the hoop to make the first layer of the web. Now, pass the string up through each opening in the web, working your way around the whole hoop. Then, do the same thing again. This time, going up through the new, smaller openings in the web. Continue working your way around the hoop and passing the string through the smallest openings in the web until the web reaches the center of the dream catcher. Cut off the excess string, leaving enough to tie a knot, and slide a bead into the end of the string. Tie a knot so the bead stays in place at the center of the dream catcher. Snip off the excess string above the knot. Now, tie several long pieces of string to the bottom half of the hoop. Slide beads onto the strings to decorate them. Finally, attach a feather to the end of each string. Hang your dream catcher above your bed.
Now that we have learned about some Native American traditions and how dream catchers are made, they would decorate a dream catcher of their own. So they would start off by putting their name at the top of the page and read the directions. With the colors of their choice, they would decorate their dream catcher to their liking. Quietly, they would think of negative experiences, emotions, or triggers and place those words in the center of their dream catcher. Once they are done with that, they would think of positive traits, activities, and things or people and place those words around their dream catcher. On the next slide, I have included an example for those who want to see a visual or get stuck with coming up with words to fill the dream catcher.
Using the information the students learn about cultural traditions, the class could create a multicultural book where the students collect information on something of importance from their own culture. This could be a dance, a recipe, or a tradition, and write it down, and then it can be made into a collective scrapbook and given out to each student at the end of the lesson. This would be a whole class assignment done collectively. Cultural traditions could be incorporated into the ELA and social studies curriculum, with the research about traditions and what they mean, and writing their own traditions and explaining the importance of these traditions.
Hi, I'm Abby Sawyer, and now I would like to take some time to talk about U.S. concerns or problems. Instead of just generalizing issues that the Native Americans experienced, I thought I would find some more current information. So I have gathered resources from 2017 to present day. So some current issues I found include the following list I have provided on the slides. The first issue listed regards the current water crisis in the Navajo Nation. Basically, the water in which the Navajo tribe would normally obtain water from has become out of their control, and a third of their population are currently living without running water in their homes. This is a rather large concern because Navajo Nation is the largest reservation in the country, with over 175,000 people. They have requested assistance from the federal government in a lawsuit that has lasted about 20 years, but the Supreme Court has ruled just this year in June that they will not be offering assistance. The salmon shortage is a similar story, but luckily with a happier ending. Plans were just set on September 21st by the Biden-Harris administration to resupply salmon, a vital food source, to the upper Columbia River Basin due to a blockage from a federal dam. There's also the issue of Cherokee Indians' lack of representation in Congress. In a treaty nearly 200 years ago, the Cherokee tribe was promised a seat in Congress for their relocation, but there has been no progress so far. So current Cherokee tribe leaders are asking Congress to respect the treaty they signed all those years ago. As of 2018, I also discovered the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights found that American Indians rank near the bottom of all Americans in relation to their health, education, and employment. It is believed that this is due to historic discriminatory policies, insufficient resources, and ineffective federal program delivery. This is an issue that has been discussed as one that the federal government needs to take accountability for and help assist. Violence against American women, Indian women, was also a really heartbreaking issue to research. The cases of missing and or murdered Indigenous women persisted throughout the nation. Unfortunately, there is simply not enough comprehensive data to address it properly. Of course, this is despite the fact that there are currently 2 laws as of 2020 that specifically require addressing the issue. And then, of course, I'm sure we are all aware of the sacred land that is currently out of the control of Native Americans. While this is still a very prevalent issue, there is some good news regarding New Mexico's Scandoval County. Here, where the land is sacred to the people of San Felipe and Santa Ana, over 4,000 acres are likely to be returned. This is quite recent, though, and the 90-day public comment period has just begun this month. So now the topic I would like to dive into the most on the previous slide.
Sorry.
You're good. As because I have a lesson planned related to it, is reburial rights. So as some of us might already be aware, the United States has dug up many sacred Native American land in order to study the past. While this has given us some great information, we have not treated the land or their ancestors with much cultural appreciation. In fact, we have moved sacred artifacts and bones across the country away from their rightful home. To offer some good news, though, there is currently progress in Illinois thanks to their governor, J.B. Pritzker, signing the Human Remains Protection Act in August of this year. Of course, this is not the first act that has attempted to give some rights back to Indigenous families. In fact, it complements the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act that requires the return of human remains and sacred cultural objects that have been unearthed in the past 200 years. This new act, though, specifically addresses the issue of reburial, as it is important for Native American families to bury their ancestors in sacred lands, Illinois being one of them. To put pen to paper, the Illinois State Museum is required now to reunify over 1,000 individuals with their families for reburial purposes. It's really important here to understand the cultural significance of life and death for Native Americans. To understand this, we must consider the creation myths performed at burial services, which we will talk about on the next slide. So, what exactly is a creation myth? In Native American culture, a creation myth is a story of how the world came to be. There are many similarities between tribes, but each has their own specific story. A similarity you would find, though, throughout the stories includes 4 worlds and animism, or the belief that the entire universe is alive. This means that in each myth, there will be often a creating power in different animals, or bodies of water, or landscapes that are personified with human-like qualities. Now, I think the best way to learn about the myths is to actually hear one, so please watch the video.
Hi friends, today we will be learning about the creation myth of the Lakota tribe. There was another world before this one, but the people of that world did not behave themselves. Displeased, the creating power set out to make a new world. He sang several songs to bring rain, which poured stronger with each song. As he sang the 4th song, the earth split apart and water gushed up through many cracks, causing a flood. By the time the rain stopped, all of the people and nearly all of the animals had drowned. Only Kangi the crow survived. Kangi pleaded with the creating power to make him a new place to rest. So the creating power decided the time had come to make his new world. From his huge pipe bag, which contained all types of animals and birds, the creating power selected 4 animals known for their ability to remain underwater for a long time. He sent each in turn to retrieve a lump of mud from underneath the floodwater. First, the loon dove deep into the dark waters, but it was unable to reach the bottom. The otter, even with its strong webbed feet, also failed. Next, the beaver used its large flat tail to propel itself deep under the water, but it too brought nothing back. Finally, the creating power took the turtle from his pipe bag and urged it to bring back some mud. Turtle stayed under the water for so long that everyone was sure he had drowned. Then, with a splash, the turtle broke the water's surface. Mud filled its feet and claws and the cracks between its upper and lower shells. Singing, the creating power shaped the mud in his hands and spread it on the water, where it was just big enough for himself and the crow. He then shook 2 long eagle wing feathers over the mud until each spread wide and varied, overcoming the waters. Feeling saddened for the dry land, the creating power cried tears that became oceans and streams and lakes. He named the new land Turtle Continent in honor of the turtle who provided the mud from which it was formed. The creating power then took many animals and birds from his great pipe bag and spread them across the earth. From red, white, black, and yellow earth, he made men and women. The creating power gave the people his sacred pipe and told them to live by it. He warned them about the fate of the people who came before them. He promised all would be well if all living things learned to live in harmony. But the world would be destroyed again if they made it bad and ugly. Thank you.
All right. So now that we have an example of a creation myth, here's the lesson plan. Each student would be handed a comic strip, like the one on the screen, as well as copies of a few different creation myths from different tribes. They would then be asked to read each one and pick their favorite to create their comic strip on. On their comic strip, they would draw a picture of several different parts of the story to show their understanding of the sequence of events. On the next slide, I have demonstrated what this should probably look like. Now, I must apologize for my drawing skills. I would like to say I had a child do this, but no, I did not. However, I think it gives a good example of what to expect from 4th graders. Hearing the story, you should be able to identify which parts I am referring to in each section. To conclude this activity, we would share and display our comic strips and talk a bit more about why we think it is so important that reburial rights are offered to Native American tribes.
So this assignment would be done individually, and it would be incorporated into ELA and bridged with the social studies curriculum. The ELA portion would be the reading, writing, and interpretation of myths, and the social studies aspect would be the research of the myths and what they mean. Now, we created this lesson based off of fourth grade standards. So these are the fourth grade standards on this Native American unit. The entire unit can be edited down for lower grades, and it can be edited up to meet fifth and sixth grade standards as well. The next one is a few student assessment ideas. Lastly, they could be done by using traditional paper and pencil as an end of unit exam method. The projects and presentations could be used as assessments as well to see what students have gained, whether it's individual or group. And then lastly, we could do a Kahoot. It could be created pre-unit to see how much students know about Native Americans before you start, and then it could be done again as a post-unit based on the information that was presented, and the students would be able to see how much they retained, and it could be done as a group collaboration. It could be done in centers, and you could see what they've learned. And this is our works cited, and that's it. Thank you for watching.
We did it.